The room fell silent. Every eye locked on the young woman standing in the doorway. "Miss, this is a restricted area," a security guard finally spoke, his tone a mix of suspicion and authority. "I'll only take a minute," she replied, her voice calm but firm. The tension in the air was palpable. She had been standing in the shadow of her family name for too long, and now it was time to face the storm head-on. Just weeks ago, Alyssa Carter had been a name whispered in admiration at high society galas, the pampered heiress to one of the nation's most formidable business empires. But now she was just Alyssa, stripped of luxury, diving headfirst into the murky waters of deception and betrayal. Her once pristine world had cracked wide open the day she found a ledger buried in her late father's desk. A ledger that didn't add up. It wasn't just numbers that raised alarms. It was the pattern of transactions leading to accounts overseas, the shadowy trails of money disappearing into the void. Her father's untimely death had left Alyssa at the helm of Carter Enterprises. A gilded throne had become a battleground overnight, and the whispers in the boardroom had grown louder with every passing day. She knew she couldn't fight what she didn't understand, so she made the boldest decision of her life. She would infiltrate her own company. Gone were the designer suits and meticulous makeup. She transformed into Lila James, a fresh-faced hire with a shaky resume and a desperate smile. And when she stepped into the company as a lowly administrative assistant, the game began. Her new boss was Vincent Reed, a man whose charm barely concealed a sharp edge. "Let's see if you can survive a week," he'd said on her first day, his tone dripping with mockery. Alyssa, now Lila, had smiled back, knowing this was only the beginning. But survival wasn't her goal. Uncovering the truth was. And the deeper she dug, the more sinister the puzzle became. It wasn't just stolen funds. It was the employees who vanished after whistleblowing, the shell corporations siphoning millions, and the cryptic memos exchanged between Vincent and the head of HR, Miranda Cole. Alyssa's undercover work had given her access to secrets that left her breathless with fear and rage. Documents hinted at a hostile takeover orchestrated by board members she'd once trusted, backed by a rival conglomerate poised to gut Carter Enterprises from the inside out. The moment she realized the gravity of her discoveries, she knew she couldn't do it alone. Her unlikely ally came in the form of Clara, a no-nonsense office assistant with a sharp wit and an even sharper instinct for self-preservation. Clara's connections with lower-level employees became Alyssa's window into the soul of the company, a soul her father had built, but that others were now intent on destroying. But it wasn't just whispers in the corridors or data on servers that painted the picture. One fateful evening, while filing documents late into the night, Alyssa overheard Vincent and Miranda arguing in the conference room. "She's poking around where she doesn't belong," Vincent hissed. "And you think firing her will solve the problem? We don't need more loose ends." Miranda shot back. Alyssa froze, her heart pounding as the realization sank in. They were onto her. That night, Clara insisted Alyssa stay at her cramped apartment, far from the surveillance-laden penthouse Alyssa once called home. "This isn't a game anymore," Clara warned. "If they're willing to cross the line with others, they won't think twice about coming after you." The following days were a blur of calculated risks and desperate maneuvers. Alyssa and Clara worked tirelessly to gather enough evidence to expose the conspiracy. They hacked into secured servers, intercepted incriminating emails, and even planted a recording device in Vincent's office. But the climax came during a quarterly board meeting, where Alyssa, disguised as Lila, was tasked with organizing materials. Hidden in plain sight, she set up a live stream, broadcasting the meeting's proceedings to a secure location where Clara was monitoring. What unfolded in that room was worse than Alyssa had imagined. The board wasn't just complicit. They were architects of the scheme. Plans for asset stripping, layoffs, and the eventual collapse of Carter Enterprises were laid bare. And leading the charge? Vincent and Miranda, with their smug assurances that no one would stop them. As Alyssa listened, the fire in her gut ignited into a blaze. She wouldn't let her father's legacy crumble under their greed. The next morning, Alyssa confronted them. Not as Lila, but as herself. "I know what you've been doing," she declared, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Vincent's face paled. "You're making a mistake," he growled. "No, Vincent. The mistake was thinking you could get away with it." With the evidence Alyssa and Clara had collected, the authorities were summoned, and arrests were made. But the fight wasn't over. Alyssa faced months of rebuilding trust within her company and navigating the fallout of exposing some of its most powerful players. Yet, through it all, she remained undeterred. The heiress who once lived in the shadow of privilege had become a warrior in her own right, determined to reclaim her father's dream and build a legacy worth fighting for. And as she stood at the helm of Carter Enterprises, Alyssa knew one thing for certain. The battle for justice was just beginning, and she was ready for whatever came next. The fallout was swift and unrelenting. News of the scandal rocked the corporate world, sending shockwaves through media outlets and financial institutions alike. Alyssa's decision to blow the whistle on her own company was both lauded and criticized, but there was no denying one fact. She had shattered the facade of perfection that Carter Enterprises had maintained for decades. The following weeks were a grueling test of endurance. Lawyers, auditors, and investigators descended upon the company, combing through years of financial records and contracts. The scale of corruption uncovered was staggering. Employees who had been coerced into silence came forward, their stories painting a grim picture of exploitation and greed. Alyssa didn't flinch under the pressure. Every day, she stood before rooms filled with skeptical investors and frightened employees, vowing to restore the company's integrity. "We've been broken," she admitted in one particularly intense meeting. "But broken doesn't mean beyond repair. Together, we'll rebuild. Stronger, smarter, and more honest." Her words carried weight, but they weren't enough to silence all the doubters. Among them were those who questioned her motives, wondering if the heiress was merely seeking to salvage her own image. Alyssa knew that actions would speak louder than any speech she could give. With Clara's help, she launched an internal task force to root out any remaining corruption. She also enlisted a third-party firm to oversee compliance and ensure transparency. Every decision was meticulously documented and shared with stakeholders, an act of good faith to restore trust. But while the company's wounds were slowly mending, Alyssa's personal life was unraveling. One late evening, as she pored over documents in her father's old study, a manila envelope was slipped under the door. Alyssa's heart skipped a beat as she picked it up, her name scrawled in sharp handwriting across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a cryptic message. "What you've seen is only the beginning. If you value your life, stop digging." Her breath hitched. This wasn't the first threat she'd received, but this one felt different. The message wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge. "Who sent it?" Clara asked when Alyssa showed her the note. "Someone who knows I won't back down," Alyssa replied. Clara frowned. "This is serious. We need protection." Alyssa nodded. She'd already increased security around her home and office, but the note confirmed her worst fears. The corruption she had exposed was only the tip of the iceberg. Somewhere out there were bigger players, people with resources and influence who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate her if she got too close to the truth. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. One of the whistleblowers, a mid-level accountant named Nate, approached Alyssa with information he had been too afraid to share before. "I worked on the offshore accounts," he confessed, his hands trembling. "But it wasn't just Carter Enterprises. There were other companies involved, big ones. They're connected like a network." Alyssa leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "A network?" Nate nodded. "They call it the Syndicate. It's a group of powerful corporations and individuals who control everything from markets to legislation. Your father stumbled onto it years ago. That's why he trailed off, but Alyssa understood. Her father's death wasn't just a tragic accident. It was an execution. Fueled by this revelation, Alyssa threw herself deeper into the investigation. She and Clara worked tirelessly to piece together the fragments of information Nate had provided. The syndicate wasn't just targeting Carter Enterprises. It was manipulating entire industries for profit. But every step forward came with a price. Alyssa's nights were plagued with paranoia, her every move shadowed by unseen eyes. Her car was tampered with, forcing her to rely on hired drivers. A package delivered to her office turned out to contain a broken clock. Its hands stopped at 3:15, the exact time her father's car had gone off the road. "They're trying to scare you," Clara said one night as they reviewed their findings in a secured office. "They want you to give up. They're wasting their time," Alyssa replied, her jaw set with determination. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about everyone they've hurt, and everyone they will hurt if we don't stop them." The final piece of the puzzle came from an unlikely ally, an ex-syndicate member who had grown disillusioned with their methods. Known only as Elias, he reached out through encrypted messages, offering to expose the syndicate's leadership in exchange for protection. Meeting Elias was a gamble, but Alyssa knew it was one she had to take. In a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of the city, she finally came face to face with the man who could bring it all down. "They'll kill me for this," Elias said, his voice trembling. "Then why are you doing it?" Alyssa asked. "Because your father believed in something bigger than himself," Elias replied. "He gave his life trying to stop them. If you have even a fraction of his courage, maybe, just maybe, you can finish what he started." Elias handed over a flash drive containing files that mapped out the syndicate's operations. Names, dates, transactions, it was all there. But as Alyssa and Clara pored over the data, they realized the true scale of the challenge ahead. The syndicate wasn't just powerful. It was embedded in the fabric of society. Taking it down would require not just evidence, but allies, strategy, and an unyielding will. "This is it," Alyssa said, staring at the screen. "This is the fight my father died for. And it's the fight we're going to win," Clara replied, her voice resolute. The syndicate had declared war, but Alyssa wasn't just defending her legacy anymore. She was fighting for justice, for truth, and for the countless lives that had been trampled under the weight of greed and corruption. The battle was far from over, but Alyssa Carter was ready to face it head-on. The revelation of the syndicate's reach was staggering. Alyssa and Clara knew they were facing an opponent with unlimited resources, shadowy connections, and a willingness to destroy anyone who stood in their way. But they also had something the syndicate didn't expect: the courage to fight back. With Elias's files in hand, Alyssa began assembling a team of allies she could trust. First was Clara, whose loyalty and ingenuity had been unshakable from the start. Then came Nate, the accountant who risked everything to come forward. Elias, though reluctant, agreed to stay on as an advisor, offering insights into the syndicate's inner workings. But Alyssa needed more. To dismantle the syndicate, she needed people with power, influence, and a platform to expose the truth. She turned to Emery Tate, a veteran journalist known for taking down corporate giants. "You're playing with fire," Emery said after Alyssa laid out her case in a private meeting. "I know," Alyssa replied, "but this fire is already burning everything my father built. I can't stand by and let it spread." Emery studied her for a long moment before nodding. "If you're willing to risk it all, so am I. But be prepared, this won't end cleanly." The plan was ambitious and dangerous. Expose the syndicate piece by piece, forcing its members into the light where they were most vulnerable. It would require timing, precision, and an iron will. The first target was Vincent Reed. Using the files Elias provided, Clara uncovered a series of meetings Vincent had with high-ranking syndicate members. One meeting, set to take place at a luxury hotel, presented the perfect opportunity to strike. Alyssa and Clara, disguised as hotel staff, infiltrated the venue with hidden cameras. From a service corridor, they watched as Vincent sat down with two men Elias identified as key syndicate operatives. "This merger will go through, no matter what obstacles she throws at us," Vincent said, his tone smug. "By the time Carter Enterprises collapses, she'll be nothing more than a cautionary tale." Alyssa's blood boiled, but Clara placed a steadying hand on her arm. "We'll take him down," she whispered. They captured everything on tape: the plans, the bribes, and Vincent's damning admission of sabotaging Carter Enterprises. The footage was delivered anonymously to Emery, who wasted no time releasing an explosive exposé. The fallout was immediate. Vincent was arrested, and the syndicate's influence began to crack. But the victory came at a cost. The syndicate retaliated with brutal efficiency. Alyssa's office was ransacked, her personal bank accounts frozen. Clara narrowly escaped a car accident that was no accident at all. And Elias, the syndicate's defector, went dark, leaving Alyssa to wonder if he had been silenced or turned against her. "They're trying to break us," Alyssa said one night, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "They're afraid of us," Clara countered. "That's why they're fighting so hard. We've shaken them, Alyssa. We just have to hold on." But holding on became harder with each passing day. The syndicate's connections reached into law enforcement, politics, and the media, spinning narratives that painted Alyssa as a desperate heiress seeking revenge for her father's death. Public support wavered, but Alyssa refused to back down. She doubled down on her efforts, rallying employees at Carter Enterprises and launching initiatives to rebuild the company's reputation. "This isn't just about taking them down," she told her team. "It's about proving that we can be better, that we will be better." The next breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Clara managed to decrypt a hidden file in Elias's data, a list of syndicate meeting locations and encrypted communications. The list included a high-level summit scheduled to take place in 2 weeks. "This is our chance," Alyssa said, her eyes alight with determination. "To do what?" Nate asked. "To bring them all down," she replied. The summit was to be held at a private estate under heavy security. Alyssa and her team devised a bold plan: infiltrate the event, plant surveillance equipment, and gather undeniable evidence of the syndicate's operations. The night of the summit was one of tension and danger. Alyssa, dressed as a server, moved through the estate with calculated precision, placing tiny cameras and microphones in key locations. Clara monitored everything from a nearby van, guiding Alyssa through the labyrinthine corridors. But the syndicate was nothing if not vigilant. Alyssa's heart nearly stopped when a guard confronted her near the conference room. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "Refilling drinks," she said, holding up a tray with a calmness she didn't feel. The guard's eyes narrowed, but he waved her off. Alyssa exhaled slowly, her nerves taut as a wire. Inside the conference room, the syndicate's leaders spoke freely, unaware they were being recorded. They discussed plans to manipulate markets, silence whistleblowers, and orchestrate political deals. As Alyssa listened, one name made her blood run cold: Elias. "He's been compromised," one man said. "We'll deal with him after the summit." Alyssa's stomach churned. She had to warn him, but first she needed to finish the mission. Hours later, with the evidence secured, Alyssa slipped out of the estate and rejoined Clara. "We got it," she said, collapsing into the van. But the victory was bittersweet. Elias's life hung in the balance, and the syndicate would retaliate with everything they had. The following morning, Emery released the recordings. The exposé sent shockwaves through the nation, sparking investigations and arrests. But the syndicate's core remained elusive, their influence still strong. As Alyssa stood before the cameras, addressing the media, she knew the fight was far from over. But for the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope. The syndicate was no longer untouchable, and she was just getting started. The syndicate's retaliation came faster than Alyssa had anticipated. The day after the recordings were released, her personal security team intercepted a package delivered to her office. Inside was a simple card with the words, "You're in over your head. Stop or we'll stop you." Clara's face darkened when she saw it. "They're getting desperate." "They should be," Alyssa replied, her voice like steel. "The cracks are starting to show." But even as she said it, she knew the fight was far from over. The syndicate's power ran deeper than anything she'd ever imagined. It wasn't just about corporate greed anymore. It was about control over the very systems that govern society. The evidence from the summit had sparked nationwide outrage. Politicians and corporate leaders implicated in the recordings were scrambling to cover their tracks. Public opinion swung sharply in Alyssa's favor, with calls for sweeping reform growing louder by the day. But the syndicate wasn't going down without a fight. Elias's disappearance weighed heavily on Alyssa. He had been her most valuable insider, and without him, her team was left with unanswered questions about the syndicate's structure and leadership. "He knew the risks," Clara said one evening as they reviewed the fallout from the summit exposé. But we need to focus on what we do have. And what we have, Nate added, joining the conversation, is a list of names tied to off-the-books transactions. If we follow the money, we might find their next move. Alyssa nodded, her mind racing. The syndicate's strength was its secrecy, but every shadow had a source of light. They just had to find it. Over the next week, Alyssa and her team worked tirelessly to track the syndicate's financial operations. Clara's tech skills were invaluable, allowing them to access encrypted communications and hidden accounts. One name kept surfacing: Alexander Voss. Voss was a billionaire with a reputation for ruthless business tactics. Publicly, he owned a chain of luxury resorts, but the data suggested he was the syndicate's financial mastermind, controlling their vast network of shell companies and offshore accounts. If we take him down, Alyssa said, we cut off their funding. But getting to Voss wouldn't be easy. He was a ghost, moving between private estates and heavily guarded events. Alyssa knew they needed a way in, and the opportunity came in the form of an exclusive charity gala Voss was hosting in Monaco. The gala was a who's who of the global elite, exactly the kind of crowd where the syndicate felt untouchable. Alyssa and Clara hatched a plan to infiltrate the event, posing as wealthy philanthropists with a supposed interest in Voss's resorts. You're sure about this? Clara asked as they boarded the flight to Monaco. Alyssa nodded. If we want to expose them, we have to play their game. The opulence of the gala was staggering. Crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and a sea of designer gowns. Alyssa and Clara blended seamlessly, their carefully curated personas drawing just the right amount of attention. It didn't take long for Voss to notice Alyssa. You must be new to these circles, he said, approaching her with a glass of wine in hand. Not as new as I look, Alyssa replied smoothly, flashing a practiced smile. Voss chuckled, his sharp eyes assessing her. And what brings you here? Business, she said, leaning in slightly. I've heard you're the man to talk to when it comes to ambitious investments. Voss smirked, clearly intrigued. Ambition, I like that. Let's talk. Alyssa's heart pounded as she followed him to a private lounge. Clara, listening through an earpiece, whispered updates as she navigated the gala, planting surveillance devices and intercepting communications. Voss was charming, but Alyssa could sense the menace beneath his polished exterior. He spoke in vague terms about opportunities and partnerships, but she pushed just enough to keep him interested without raising suspicion. When he finally excused himself, Alyssa returned to Clara, who was waiting in the kitchen. Did we get anything? Alyssa asked, pulling off her heels. Clara grinned. Oh, we got plenty. Back in their hotel room, the team reviewed the data Clara had collected. Among the intercepted communications was a coded message outlining a meeting between Voss and several high-ranking syndicate members. It's happening in 3 days, Clara said, pointing to the details. A private yacht in international waters. Alyssa felt a surge of determination. This was their chance to catch the syndicate's leadership in one place, with nowhere to hide. But it was also a risk unlike any they'd taken before. The syndicate would be armed, prepared for betrayal, and ruthless in their response to any threat. We'll need a plan, Alyssa said. And this time, no room for error. 3 days later, Alyssa and her team found themselves aboard a borrowed speedboat, racing toward the syndicate's yacht under the cover of darkness. Clara had hacked the yacht's security system, creating a window for them to board unnoticed. Once on board, the plan was simple. Plant surveillance devices, gather evidence, and get out before anyone noticed. But nothing about the syndicate was ever simple. The yacht was a fortress, its corridors patrolled by armed guards. Alyssa's heart pounded as she moved through the shadows, her every step calculated and silent. In the main conference room, she caught a glimpse of Voss and the syndicate's leadership gathered around a table, discussing their next moves. Clara's voice crackled in her earpiece. We're live. Everything's being recorded. But just as Alyssa turned to leave, a hand grabbed her arm. Going somewhere? She spun around to face one of the guards, his expression cold and unforgiving. Clara, Alyssa whispered, we've been compromised. The guard's grip tightened, but before he could raise the alarm, Clara's voice came through again. Hold on. A second later, The yacht's lights flickered, then went out completely. In the chaos, Alyssa broke free and sprinted toward the speedboat. Clara was waiting for her, the engine already roaring. "Did you get it?" she shouted as Alyssa jumped aboard. "I got it," Alyssa replied, clutching the device containing the syndicate's most sensitive plans. As they sped away, gunshots rang out behind them, but the yacht quickly faded into the night. Back on land, Alyssa and her team reviewed the data. It was everything they needed: names, locations, and detailed records of the syndicate's operations. "This is it," Clara said, her voice heavy with exhaustion and triumph. Alyssa nodded, her expression hard. "Let's end this." The next morning, they delivered the evidence to international authorities and trusted media outlets. The syndicate's empire began to crumble as arrests were made worldwide. For Alyssa, it wasn't just a victory, it was vindication. The fight had cost her everything, but she had kept her father's legacy alive. And as she stood on the steps of Carter Enterprises, addressing a crowd of employees and reporters, she knew this was only the beginning. Because while the syndicate had been exposed, Alyssa Carter had become something even they couldn't destroy, a symbol of defiance, justice, and unyielding strength.